You've got to get up pretty early in the morning to speak to America's hardworking farmers and food producers. We should know. FLM Harvest is a strategic, full-service creative consultancy proud to reach more farmers, farmer boards, and food and commodity associations than any agency in the country. And we understand omni-channel as well as we understand the journey from field to fork. Most importantly, we connect clients to the audiences that matter to them.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Executive Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And we're coming to you here on a Friday morning. I guess I wasn't in this particular space on Thursday afternoon here in the Cannon House office building. I imagine there was a little bit more activity in here yesterday than there was here this morning. But happy to be able to come to you maybe a day later than usual, but still to provide you with that same news and information that you've come to rely upon from this program. And we want to start this week with a very potentially important piece of information delivered by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi yesterday. She was offering her weekly press conference to a team of reporters on Capitol Hill and was asked about the U.S Mexico-Canada Agreement. Said, you know, even if we were to get a deal today, today being yesterday now, that might not be possible to get that implementing legislation voted on before the end of the year, given all the procedural steps that need to happen. And Phil, I know I'm not telling you anything when I say there was a lot of ag groups, a lot of ag interests that were really hoping to get this passed before the end of the year. But I mean, just practically speaking, what happens on Capitol Hill on an election year when December 31st turns into January 1st?
Well, there's so much to be done that's been dropped into December, and this could go fairly quickly, but as you point out, there are procedural steps that has to come out. They have to have the text of the implementing bill. That's what we're talking about. They don't actually vote on the agreement itself. They vote on an implementing bill, all the changes in law and U.S. law that have to be made to implement what is in the agreement. So it takes a little bit of time. It's still theoretically possible. Obviously, if they'd gotten this out ahead of the Thanksgiving break, it would have looked a lot better for December. Hence the Speaker saying it could lapse into 2020. Obviously, both sides are trying to put a little pressure, keep the pressure on the other. The White House on one side, House Democrats on the other. So, yeah, this does push it a little closer into the front of the year. It's still beginning of the year, still possible. We talked yesterday, Thursday, at the end of the day with Kevin Brady, who's the top Republican on the House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over trade. Brady, of course, is a former chairman of the committee. He told us that next week is really critical. The chairman of the committee, Richard Neal, is supposed to meet with U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer, or at least talk on the phone to see if they can get closer to wrapping up the final issues. And Brady said, we'll see, but he really thought that what happens in the next week, heading into December, will be very important.
Mm-hmm. And Neal, Lighthizer, and Pelosi did all have the chance to meet and discuss kind of the state of things yesterday. Neal emerging from that meeting joking that he was actually going to be having Thanksgiving dinner with Robert Lighthizer. I don't know that they're going to be in that level of proximity, but a very clear indication that they do expect those conversations to continue. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I think the fact that we're not seeing, you know, outward negative talk from any of the negotiating parties involved bodes well for the agreement. Nobody has said this isn't going to happen. They have just said we might need a little more time to make it happen.
And the fact that they're talking during the Thanksgiving week. The other important thing that happened is the about 8-member House Democrat working group that had been meeting regularly with Lighthizer through the fall to talk about the issue. They're no longer meeting. Their work is done. That strongly suggests that this is down to a handful of issues just between basically Speaker Pelosi, Chairman Neal, the president of the AFL-CIO, and the White House.
So definitely getting down to the finer points of USMCA negotiations, and we'll be sure to keep you up to date as those points come to fruition and we potentially see that implementing legislation out of these negotiations. But want to keep you up to date on another item that came across Capitol Hill yesterday as well. November 21st was the day when government funding was set to expire, and November 21st was the day the Senate passed a resolution to, passed a bill to keep government funding from expiring at midnight. We now have moved that deadline another month, about to December 20th is when the current continuing resolution is set to expire. And as Phil mentioned, the House and Senate both on recess next week. But really, Phil, it's looking like they're going to have to iron out some of these philosophical differences on both spending priorities and some political differences in the month of December.
Yeah, the big issue on the budget spending bills for fiscal 2020, which, oh, by the way, started back October the 1st, is the president's demand for more money for the border wall. Democrats have not budged on that yet. They've also have not even come to agreement on the spending levels for each of there's 12 individual spending bills each year. They're usually at the end brought together and passed in one or two big packages. But the House and Senate have still not agreed on the spending limits for each one of those bills. And when you don't have an overall cap, you can't determine where all the other programs, and with all of the agencies from USDA to EPA to the Interior Department to Labor, all of them, Defense Department, you've got to have those individual spending limits agreed to before you can actually get agreements on all of the spending levels within the bills for the departments and agencies and all the programs. They're not even there yet.
So definitely something to watch as we get closer and closer to December 20th. A lot of folks are very interested in going home for the Christmas holiday and the Christmas holiday season. Probably don't want to kick that can too much further down the road. They don't want to have a government shutdown go into the next week as happened last year. So
3 weeks in December. Those they got a lot to do.
Yeah. So another thing that might be coming to the House floor in the month of December was something that we saw action on in the House Judiciary Committee this week, and that is an ag labor bill brought forward by Zoe Lofgren of California and Dan Newhouse of Washington. And obviously, if you're a veteran in the area of farm policy, you know that ag labor has been a contentious issue for, I don't know, since agriculture was invented, probably.
And getting to be bigger and bigger.
And now it's becoming a more and more contentious issue on Capitol Hill. But, Phil, it should be stated that we saw a ag labor bill get a markup in a congressional committee and is headed to the House floor. There is some significance there.
Yeah, yes, there is. And at the very least, this is a marker for the next Congress. Now, the groups behind this bill, there are more than 300 organizations at state, local, national organizations that have signed on in support of this bill. They would like to see it pass next year and into law. That's a tough sled when you get out of the House and get into the Senate. The White House is certainly not supportive yet. But it's important, significant items in here. The most significant probably is expanding the H-2A program to year-round workers. There's a cap on that, but the cap on the number of workers, but it does expand it to year-round workers. It does make some significant reforms in the wage rates for H-2A. But Republicans, most Republicans are probably going to vote against this bill on the floor because of another provision that is critical to Democrats and to farm workers, because it would provide a path to legal status for existing workers who are undocumented. And that's the most contentious issue, always has been the most contentious issue. And until you get both sides willing to compromise on that, you're not going to address this issue.
And Phil, as you and I were discussing before we press record on this video, you know, that pathway to legal status has often resulted in cries of amnesty from some sides of this organization or some sides of this debate. You know, we saw that in 2013 with the immigration debate, and we're seeing that already this week as there was some, you know, the A word was brought up a couple times in the markup of this bill this week.
Yeah, the top Republican on the Judiciary Committee, Doug Collins of Georgia, called it massive amnesty. So there you go.
So that's definitely a hurdle that folks pushing that bill will have to overcome. As Phil mentioned, support of a large number of agricultural organizations, but the American Farm Bureau Federation not quite on board with the bill just yet. After the bill was formally passed out of the committee on Thursday morning after a voice vote Wednesday evening, they moved to a formal recorded vote Thursday morning. And after that passage, a statement from the American Farm Bureau Federation outlining some of the things they would like to see in that bill moving forward. So that's definitely something to watch as that bill makes its way to the floor and potentially makes its way through the House and over to the Senate for whatever consideration the legislation might achieve over there.
Yeah, well, we'll be watching that floor debate in the House in December really to see how many Republicans vote for it. If you did have a large, significant number where you had more than a veto-proof majority for the bill, it would be interesting. It would add a little bit of, it would certainly send a message to the Senate and certainly send a message for the next Congress.
So I think that's going to do it for this week. As Phil mentioned, House and Senate both on recess next week, so we won't have a video for you, but we do have a Meet the Farmhands interview that I think you're really going to enjoy. I would encourage you to stop by after you have filled yourself up with turkey. Stop by the website and give that video a watch. I think it'll be an interesting one for all of you. But I think that's going to do it for this week. So for Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.